Chapter 1, The Shape of Ordinary Days. The first time I noticed something was off, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lipstick stain on a collar, or a late-night text message glowing suspiciously in the dark. It was smaller than that, so small that I almost dismissed it, the way you ignore a shadow in the corner of your vision until it grows large enough to demand your attention. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I live, or I suppose I should say, I lived, in a mid-sized city in North Carolina, the kind of place where the seasons change with a certain poetry. Winters are gray but gentle, summers heavy with heat and thick with cicadas, autumns crisp and gold, and springs fragrant with azaleas blooming along brick sidewalks. My house sits on a quiet street lined with tall oaks whose roots buckle the pavement in places. It's not a mansion or anything close, but it's the kind of two-story colonial revival you see in real estate magazines. White shutters, a porch swing, flower beds my wife tended to with steady patience. Her name is Emily. 32 years old. We'd been married for 6 years when everything began to unravel. To the outside world, and often to ourselves, we looked like the picture of stability, a couple who had grown into each other's habits, who knew each other's coffee orders, who could predict each other's moods with a glance. She's the kind of woman who lights up a room, not in a loud, demanding way, but quietly, through her warmth, her ability to listen, the way her laugh makes others feel clever. I met her in Chapel Hill when we were both still fumbling through our 20s. I was working in IT for a hospital, she was finishing graduate school in education. Our paths crossed at a friend's birthday dinner, and by the end of the night we were talking as though we'd known each other for years. There was no game, no guardedness. Just this easy, flowing connection. I'd never believed in love at first sight, and maybe I still don't. But I do believe in recognition, the sense that someone has been walking toward you for a long time, and you finally meet them halfway. By the time we married, I thought I knew her as well as I knew myself. I thought we had built something solid, something weatherproof. I thought wrong. Most days back then were simple. I'd wake up early, earlier than Emily, because she hated mornings, and shower before heading downstairs. The house always smelled faintly of coffee, because we'd invested in one of those programmable machines that starts brewing before the alarm goes off. I'd pour 2 mugs, mine strong and black, hers with cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon the way she liked. By the time I carried hers upstairs, she'd usually be stirring under the covers, her hair a soft tangle across the pillow. Morning, she'd mumble, sitting up against the headboard. She always reached for the cup before she kissed me, which used to make me laugh. Love you too, I'd tease, handing it over. Love you more, she'd say automatically, blowing on the coffee before taking a sip. And that was us, comfortable, predictable. A rhythm of shared routines. She worked at a local elementary school as a reading specialist, which meant her mornings were filled with the energy of children struggling through words, and her afternoons with lesson planning and paperwork. I worked a 9-to-5 at the hospital's IT department, fixing whatever broke, managing software updates, making sure the network didn't collapse under the weight of constant demand. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and left me with a sense of usefulness. Evenings were our time. We'd cook together, she was better at it, but I liked chopping vegetables beside her, listening to music while the pan hissed. Sometimes we'd eat at the small wooden table in the kitchen, sometimes in front of the TV if one of us was tired. Weekends meant grocery shopping at the farmer's market, or long walks through Pullen Park, or dinners with friends. It was an ordinary life, but it was ours. Or at least, I believed it was. The first crack appeared one rainy Thursday in April. The kind of day where the sky hangs low and heavy, and the streets shine with reflections. I'd come home later than usual because of a system outage at work. The house was dim when I walked in, quiet except for the patter of rain against the windows. I called, setting my briefcase down by the door. In here. Her voice floated from the kitchen. I found her at the counter, a half-empty glass of wine beside her, chopping onions. She looked up, startled, almost guilty, as though she hadn't expected me so soon. "You're early," she said, though I was actually late. I laughed. "Not exactly. The outage ate my whole afternoon." "Oh." She forced a smile and went back to chopping. "Well, good. You're home." It was nothing. At least, it should have been nothing. But the way she'd looked at me stuck in my mind, a flicker of panic, quickly smoothed over. Like a child caught doing something they shouldn't. I didn't say anything. Why would I? Marriage teaches you to pick your battles, and one odd look didn't qualify as a battle. Still, as I poured myself a glass of wine and joined her at the counter, I couldn't shake the faint unease. That night, after we'd eaten and watched an episode of some forgettable Netflix show, she went to bed early, claiming a headache. I stayed downstairs, scrolling through emails, listening to the storm outside. At one point I thought I heard her phone buzz upstairs, quick and insistent. I almost went to check, but stopped myself. Her phone was her business. That was the kind of trust we had, or the kind I thought we had. And yet, when I finally climbed into bed beside her, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. Life went on. The next day she was cheerful, almost too cheerful, as though overcompensating. She packed my lunch with a little note, "Have a great day, love you," something she hadn't done in years. Sweet, yes. But also strange in its suddenness. I began noticing other small things after that. She guarded her phone more carefully, turning it face down on the counter, carrying it with her when she left a room. She started working late more often, claiming lesson plans or parent meetings. When I offered to pick her up one evening, she insisted she'd drive herself, her tone a little too sharp. Each thing on its own was explainable. But together, they formed a pattern. And once you start seeing patterns, it's hard to stop. I remember one evening in particular, a week or so later. We were sitting on the porch swing, the spring air cool and damp, the smell of freshly cut grass drifting from the neighbor's yard. Fireflies blinked in the darkening trees. "Do you ever think about where we'll be in 5 years?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. "Sure," I said. "Hopefully in this same house, maybe with a kid or two running around." "Why?" She didn't answer right away. She was staring at the street, at the glow of a street lamp. "Just wondering," she said finally. Then she leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and we rocked gently in the night. But her weight felt different somehow, not the familiar comfort of years, but something heavier, more complicated. As though she were leaning on me not out of love, but out of guilt. And for the first time since our wedding day, I felt the faintest thread of fear. Fear that the life I had built, the life I trusted, wasn't as solid as I thought. Fear that Emily, the woman who had once walked toward me across a crowded room and made me believe in recognition, was slipping away into a part of herself I no longer knew. That was the beginning. A glance in the kitchen, a guarded phone, a strange question on the porch. Tiny moments, ordinary on their own. But when you love someone, you learn to read them like a book, and I could sense pages being turned in secret. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to split open, word by word, lie by lie. And I was about to discover just how much betrayal can hollow a man out from the inside. Chapter 2, Shadows in the Routine. The funny thing about suspicion is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't crash down like thunder. It seeps in quietly, threading itself into the spaces between moments, until even the most ordinary day begins to feel laced with hidden meaning. For a while, I told myself I was imagining things. That I was stressed from work, or paranoid, or maybe just restless. Marriage, like anything long-term, can fall into rhythms so familiar they become almost invisible. Maybe I was just overanalyzing the ordinary. But deep down, I knew. I knew something had shifted in Emily, even if I couldn't yet name it. The hospital where I worked had a windowless office for the IT staff, a space filled with the low hum of servers and the faint scent of burnt coffee. My desk faced a beige wall, decorated with a corkboard full of sticky notes I rarely updated. I spent my days troubleshooting issues over the phone or in person, walking sterile hallways where nurses rushed past and patients' families sat with weary eyes. It was during those endless, fluorescent-lit hours that my mind would wander. I'd find myself replaying Emily's expressions, the way she had startled when I came home that rainy Thursday, the way her laughter sometimes felt a second too forced. I told myself to focus on work, on fixing someone's broken login, on calming a surgeon furious about a lost file, but my thoughts always circled back to her. At lunch, I'd sit with a sandwich in the cafeteria, watching people around me. Families clutching paper cups of coffee. Doctors bent over their phones. Couples visiting patients, holding hands with a certain unconscious ease. I used to feel that way with Emily, an effortless connection, an unthinking intimacy. Lately, though, I felt like I was reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Home life carried on, at least on the surface. Emily still made dinner some nights, though more often she claimed she was too tired or too busy, and we'd order takeout instead. She still asked me about my day, still kissed me goodnight, still wore the necklace I'd given her on our 5th anniversary. But the small details told a different story. She started wearing more makeup during the week, even on days she said she was buried in paperwork. She bought new clothes, flattering but slightly out of character, like she was dressing for someone else's eyes. She began taking evening walks alone, something she'd never shown interest in before. When I offered to go with her, she smiled too quickly and said, "No, it's just to clear my head." I tried not to be jealous of her phone, but it was hard. She carried it everywhere, setting it on silent when we were together. Once, when she left it charging on the nightstand and went to shower, I felt a wave of temptation so strong it scared me. I didn't touch it, at least, not then. But the fact that I wanted to was enough to leave me shaken. One Saturday morning, we went grocery shopping at the farmer's market downtown. The air was warm, the streets lined with stalls selling strawberries, homemade jams, baskets of fresh flowers. Emily wore a yellow sundress that caught the light, her hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. She looked beautiful, radiant, even. People glanced at her as we walked past, and I felt that old swell of pride, the sense that she was mine, that we were us. We bought peaches, bread, and a bottle of local honey. She chatted with the vendors easily, laughing in that soft way that had drawn me to her years ago. But then, as she bent to examine a basket of tomatoes, I caught a look on her face, distant, distracted, as if she were somewhere else entirely. The smile faded, and for a moment she seemed almost sad. When she noticed me watching, she straightened quickly, forcing the brightness back. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah. Just thinking about work." She slipped her arm through mine. "Let's get flowers for the table." It should have been enough, that answer. But it wasn't. Not anymore. The first real clue came a week later. It was a Tuesday evening. I'd gotten home before her, the house quiet except for the faint tick of the kitchen clock. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the air damp and cool, the windows streaked with droplets. I changed into an old t-shirt and jeans, poured myself a beer, and settled on the couch to wait. Her car pulled into the driveway later than usual, almost 8. When she came in, she looked flushed, her hair slightly windblown despite the calm weather. She kissed me quickly, too quickly, and set her bag down by the door. "Long day?" I asked. "Yeah. Staff meeting ran late." She avoided my eyes as she headed to the kitchen, opening cabinets like she was searching for something. I watched her for a moment, something uneasy tugging at me. Then I noticed her phone had slipped halfway out of her purse. The screen lit up briefly, showing a notification before going dark. My heart lurched. I hadn't caught the name, but I'd seen the preview of the message, "Can't stop thinking about last night." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My body went cold, my hand tightening around the beer bottle. I told myself I might have misread it, that it could be nothing, maybe a joke from a friend, maybe out of context. But deep down, I knew. It was the kind of message you didn't get from a coworker, the kind of message that didn't belong in a marriage. Emily turned back then, catching me watching her. "What?" she asked lightly, too lightly. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile, my mind spinning. She carried on with her evening as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had shifted. The seed of doubt had sprouted into something larger, something undeniable. That night in bed, I lay awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing, staring at the ceiling. My chest ached with questions I couldn't ask. Who was it? How long? Why? And most terrifying of all, what if I was right? The days that followed blurred together. At work, I found myself staring at screens without seeing them, my thoughts consumed by possibilities. At home, I watched her more closely, analyzing every word, every gesture. I became hyper-aware of details. The way she smiled at her phone, the way she lingered in the shower, the way she seemed to retreat behind her eyes when I asked simple questions. I hated myself for it, this constant surveillance of the woman I loved. But once you see the crack in the glass, you can't unsee it. You can only wait for it to spread. One evening, desperate to clear my head, I went for a walk alone. The neighborhood was quiet, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalks. I passed houses with lit windows, glimpses of families inside, a father helping a child with homework, a couple laughing over dinner, a dog sprawled on a rug. Ordinary lives, untouched by suspicion. When I returned, Emily was sitting on the couch with her laptop, a blanket draped over her legs. She looked up, surprised. "Where'd you go?" "Just needed some air," I said. She nodded, closing the laptop a little too quickly. "Want to watch something?" I sat beside her, pretending to focus on the TV. But all I could think about was that message, "Can't stop thinking about last night." I didn't confront her. Not yet. Partly because I was afraid of the answer, and partly because I wanted proof, something undeniable, something solid. I wasn't ready to detonate our life together based on one glimpse of a text. But in the quiet of those evenings, with the shadows of the house pressing in around me, I felt the truth tightening like a noose. Emily was slipping away. And I didn't know how to stop her. Chapter 3, Looking for Cracks. Suspicion is a poison. At first, it just lingers in your blood, a subtle ache you can almost ignore. But soon it spreads, coursing through everything, tainting every word, every glance, every silence. By the time I reached that point, I couldn't look at Emily without feeling it burn inside me. The following week was a blur of ordinary days that felt anything but ordinary. I went through the motions at work, typing, answering calls, solving problems, but in truth my mind was always elsewhere. I became an actor playing the role of husband, reciting lines I'd known by heart for years while my real thoughts spun in darker directions. Emily carried on as though nothing had changed. She laughed at my jokes, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, told me about her students in the evenings. To anyone watching us from the outside, we looked the same as always. But I had begun to notice the gaps, the places where the seams didn't quite line up. She started coming home later, always with an excuse ready. Staff meetings. Extra tutoring sessions. Paperwork at school. Some nights she claimed she'd gone out with coworkers for a drink. She'd deliver the explanations casually, almost too casually, like lines rehearsed in advance. And when she spoke, she never looked directly at me for long. One night, she returned home flushed and smiling, her hair tousled like she'd been in the wind. She dropped her purse on the counter and leaned down to kiss me, her lips tasting faintly of gin. "How was it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good. Just a couple of us from work. Long day, you know." "Sure," I said. But her eyes flickered then, the way they do when someone has told a story that isn't the whole truth. And I felt that poison pulse sharper in my chest. I told myself I wouldn't pry. That marriage was built on trust, and if I violated hers, I'd be just as guilty as she was. But late at night, lying beside her while she slept, I'd stare at the dim glow of her phone charging on the nightstand, feeling its presence like a locked door I wasn't allowed to open. Temptation gnawed at me. All it would take was a swipe of my finger. One look, and I'd know. One night, when the urge was unbearable, I reached for it. My hand hovered inches from the screen, my pulse hammering. But at the last second, I pulled back, shame flooding me. If I was wrong, if it was all in my head, then I'd have violated the very thing I was trying to protect. So I lay awake, caught between the need for answers and the fear of finding them. It was a small detail that finally cracked my restraint. A Thursday evening. Emily had said she'd be late, something about a parent-teacher conference. I decided to make dinner myself, something simple, spaghetti with garlic bread. The house smelled of tomato sauce and oregano when she walked in. An hour passed when she promised. Sorry, she said, dropping her bag. Meeting ran long. Which one? I asked, stirring the sauce. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Parent conference. Her tone was smooth, but that pause, it was there, a heartbeat too long. Later, as we sat at the table, she told me about a student struggling with reading, her voice animated, her hands moving as she spoke. I watched her closely, nodding at the right places, but inside I was replaying that hesitation over and over. The next day, I called the school office during my lunch break. My excuse was simple. I wanted to surprise my wife with flowers, but I wasn't sure if she'd be free after her conference. The secretary on the line was friendly. Oh, there weren't any conferences yesterday, she said without hesitation. Something in me broke then. A quiet, irrevocable crack. Once you confirm one lie, you start hunting for the rest. I became sharper, more attentive. When she said she was with co-workers, I paid attention to her clothes, her makeup, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't her usual. When she said she'd been working late, I asked for small details, and she stumbled, mixing up names, forgetting her own stories. The worst part was how easily she covered it, how quickly she smiled, how effortlessly she slid her hand into mine as though nothing had changed. But I had changed. My first risky step came a week later. Emily was in the shower, humming softly behind the curtain. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the vibration sharp in the quiet room. This time, I didn't resist. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and swiped the screen. But it was locked. She'd never used a passcode before. The realization hit me like a blow. She had locked me out. I put it back before she emerged, my heart pounding. But from that moment, there was no going back. I began looking for cracks everywhere. Receipts in her purse, unexplained gaps in her mileage, sudden new clothes tucked into the closet. I searched for anything, any shred of proof that could explain the unease eating at me. One evening, while she showered, I went through her bag. My fingers shook as I rifled through the contents: wallet, pens, lip gloss, folded papers. And then, a crumpled receipt. It was from a bar downtown. 2 cocktails, 1 whiskey, 1 gin and tonic. Time stamped at 7:42 p.m. The same night she'd claimed to be at a late parent conference. I stared at the slip of paper, my chest tight, the room spinning. It was undeniable. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was evidence. When Emily came out of the bathroom, toweling her hair, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the receipt hidden in my pocket, my face carefully blank. "You okay?" she asked, studying me. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." She smiled, kissed me lightly, and slipped into bed. I lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep, the receipt burning in my pocket like a brand. The house began to feel different after that. Shadows seemed darker, silence heavier. The rooms that had once been filled with warmth now carried a tension I couldn't shake. Every sound, the buzz of her phone, the click of her heels in the hallway, the way she laughed at something she wouldn't share, felt like another nail being driven between us. And still, I said nothing. Because once you speak it aloud, there's no undoing it. Once you accuse, once you demand, the illusion shatters forever. And I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. That weekend, we went to dinner with friends. We sat around a candlelit table, sharing appetizers and stories, laughter echoing over the clink of glasses. Emily was radiant, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. She held my hand under the table, squeezing it as though to reassure me. And for a fleeting moment, I almost convinced myself it was all in my head. That maybe the receipt was nothing, that maybe the message had been misread. That maybe love was still enough to explain away the cracks. But then her phone buzzed in her purse. I caught the quick flicker of her expression, the tiny smile she didn't mean to show. And I knew. Whoever it was, whatever it was, she was thinking of someone else, even as she held my hand. That night, as I lay beside her, I realized something with brutal clarity. I was no longer just a husband. I was an investigator. And the case was my own marriage. Chapter 4, The Unraveling. By the time May bled into June, the tension had become unbearable. I was living two lives, the husband who smiled and kissed his wife goodnight, and the silent investigator cataloging lies in the shadows. Every laugh of hers, every late arrival, every secretive glance at her phone was another stone stacked on my chest. I told myself I couldn't go on like this. I needed the truth, not guesses, not suspicions, not scraps of receipts hidden in my pocket. The truth, raw and undeniable. So one night, I decided to follow her. It was a Friday, muggy and heavy with the promise of rain. Emily claimed she had to stay late for grading, her voice smooth as silk over dinner. She dressed simply, jeans, a pale blouse, but I noticed the faint shimmer of perfume she reserved for rare occasions. She kissed me lightly, almost absently, before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. Minutes later, I followed. My car rolled down the street at a distance, headlights off until I was far enough behind. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, my hands gripping the wheel too tight, my heart hammering like I was on the edge of a cliff. She drove downtown, past the familiar glow of restaurants and bars, past the hospital where I worked, past the school she claimed to be staying late at. She parked finally outside a small wine bar tucked between two brick buildings, its windows glowing amber in the evening. I pulled over a block away, my breath shallow. And then I saw him. Tall, dark-haired, maybe late 30s. He stepped out of the bar, glancing down the street before turning toward the door. Emily emerged seconds later, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. That smile, full, unguarded, radiant, wasn't for me anymore. They embraced quickly, too close for co-workers, too familiar for friends. Then they walked inside together, their bodies brushing as they passed through the door. I sat there in the car, the world tilting around me. The city noises blurred. The distant honk of a horn, the murmur of voices, the faint roll of thunder in the distance. All I could hear was the shatter of something breaking inside me. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was flesh and blood, unfolding before my eyes. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the bar's glowing windows, my palms sweating against the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to storm inside, to drag her out, to scream until the whole world knew. But another part, colder, quieter, told me to wait. To see. To know the full extent of the betrayal. So I waited. An hour passed. Then another. The storm broke overhead, rain splattering across the windshield, blurring the golden light spilling from the bar. At last, they came out together. Laughing. Close. His hand brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. They shared a look, private and intimate, the kind of look we used to share. And then, without hesitation, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't long, but it was enough. Enough to end the life I thought I had. Enough to erase 6 years of vows with the press of his lips against hers. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I wanted to smash it, to honk the horn, to make them jump apart in shame. But I did nothing. I just sat there, a ghost watching his own life crumble. When Emily finally returned home that night, I was waiting. The house was dark, the storm still rattling the windows, shadows stretching long across the floor. She walked in humming softly, shaking rain from her hair. "You're still up," she said, setting down her bag. "Yeah," I answered. My voice sounded strange, hollow in my own ears. She smiled faintly, moving toward the kitchen. "I'll make some tea." "Don't," I said. She froze, turning to look at me. Something in my tone must have pierced the act, because her expression faltered. "What's wrong?" I stood slowly, the words sharp on my tongue. "Who is he?" Her face drained of color. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between us, broken only by the storm outside. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, but her voice trembled. "Don't," I repeated, louder this time. "Don't lie to me. I saw you. Tonight. At the bar. With him." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked away, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of the lie was too heavy to carry anymore. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words cut deeper than any knife. What followed was a blur of raw, jagged dialogue. "How long?" I demanded. "A few months," she admitted, tears filling her eyes. "Why?" My voice cracked. "Wasn't I enough?" "It's not that," she said desperately. You've always been." But I felt, invisible. Like we were just living side by side, not together. "And then I met him, Anne." "Don't." My chest burned. "Don't try to dress it up as love. You had a choice. And you chose him." She sobbed then, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The sight of her hands. Those hands I'd held in church when we said our vows, made me sick. The storm raged outside as our marriage unraveled in the living room. Words flew, accusations, defenses, apologies, none of them enough. I shouted. She cried. The walls of our home, once warm with laughter, echoed with the sound of two people tearing each other apart. And then, at last, there was nothing left to say. I walked to the door, my chest hollow, my hands trembling. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small, broken. "Out," I said. "Away. I can't look at you right now." She reached out again, but I shook my head. "You killed us, Emily." "Not me. You." And with that, I stepped into the storm. The rain drenched me instantly, cold and merciless. The streets gleamed with reflections of streetlights, the air electric with thunder. I walked without direction, my thoughts spinning, my heart fractured. Betrayal doesn't just end a marriage. It ends a version of yourself, the man who believed, the man who trusted, the man who thought love was unbreakable. That man was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, someone staring into a future he hadn't asked for but now had no choice but to face. And that was the end of us. No explosive revenge, no dramatic second chance. Just the truth, raw and merciless, standing between us like a wall that could never be torn down. The storm carried on through the night, but by morning, the air was clear. And so was I.